Today we're diving into Brighter Shores, an indie MMO that's still in early access, but already full of quirks, curiosities, and enough NPC sass to keep things interesting. Our journey begins with some character creation hiccups, a bit of opportunistic looting, and a dressing down from Captain Jal that makes me question my military etiquette. We'll be tackling goblin invasions, testing out Brighter Shores' take on cooking, and unearthing some surprising design choices along the way. Is this the next big thing in the MMO scene, or just a curious RPG in disguise? Grab your swords or sandwiches, and let's jump in. We soldier on with a new avatar and land smack in front of Captain Jal. Now, being the curious and mildly impulsive type, I decided to test the boundaries right off the bat by rummaging through a chest sitting right in front of the captain, you know, for educational purposes. And that's where we get introduced to Brighter Shores' currency system, which is delightfully straightforward: copper and silver coins. No microtransactions, no convoluted currency hierarchies where 10 ancient obsidian shards equal to one mystic platinum fragment. Just good old copper and silver. Once I'm done helping myself to the contents of a chest that clearly wasn't meant for me, the game whisks us into a very brief control tutorial. With that all out of the way, it's finally time to have a word with our friend, Captain Jal, or Jally as I'll affectionately call her. She kicks off the conversation with a formal welcome, only to follow it up with a classic "you're new so I must demeanor you" rank lecture. Apparently, addressing her as mate isn't quite protocol. My bad. As if I haven't already proven myself as a model soldier, she hits us with a classic question that echoes through military recruitment offices everywhere. Why did you decide to join? Now, I'll be honest, I have no idea why I'm here. Like, zero. And she doesn't really care either, brushing off my answer like it's nothing. In her mind, existential purpose clearly pales in comparison to job openings. She explains that thanks to a squad that recently got lost in the mines, there's plenty of opportunity for eager recruits like me. Well, that certainly doesn't sound ominous. That cheery news, we are directed to Corporal Binns, who will be running us through the training drills. The quest menu looks refreshingly straightforward. Brighter Shores sticks to a main story quest or MSQ structure at the top, with optional side quests underneath. What's nice is how the game gives you guidance on objectives without smothering the screen in obnoxious waymarkers or autopaths. I later discover that clicking on any of the highlighted text in the quest log opens the map and shows you where to go, assuming you've unlocked the area. Useful yet unobtrusive. Movement feels surprisingly responsive. There's a nice fluidity to navigating the environment, and you can shift your viewpoint easily enough, even if the left mouse button seems to be doing most of the heavy lifting. We finally catch up with Corporal Binns, who is precisely as thrilled to be babysitting rookies as you'd expect. I'm tempted to address him as Mr. just to see his reaction, but I decide against it. Binns instructs us to see the quartermaster for gear, which is where we encounter the game's first dad joke. Unfortunately, the quartermaster, in his tunnel stoicism, barely reacts. The bag system here is simple and intuitive, with slots for different items and enough room to manage early game inventory comfortably. Notably, we can equip a one-hander, two-hander, and a ranged weapon all at once. Although equipping different weapons is not possible during combat, you are able to swap between the currently equipped weapons in combat, which is quite a nice touch. Next, we meet Anjay, who grants us magical access. The dialogue here suggests someone on the writing team may have had one too many tarot readings, because the conversation takes a mystical turn. Men, after all, will do anything other than go to therapy, so here we are. Anjay touches my forehead, which is a little bit reminiscent of Rafiki from The Lion King, and he's a bit taken back by my aura. Unusual, he says. Should I be worried? Nah. Apparently, it's no big deal, so we move on. Newly blessed with magical access. I feel so very secure in their stringent entry requirements. Then we meet Sultar, who needs to test our magical aptitude before he'll teach us anything useful. This leads into an introduction to the game's teleport system, which I'm betting will be a huge quality of life feature later on. We summon what can only be described as the laziest magical Uber in existence, because why walk when you can test out a flashy teleport spell? After that, we're introduced to the Sense spell, which is actually quite nifty. It pings every interactable item within a set radius, making it incredibly useful for scouring the environment for quest items or for foraging. I can see myself leaning heavily on this one. And just as I'm setting into my new powers, an alarm blares, conveniently timed for the tutorial's climax. and goblins launch a surprise attack. Squad 1, move out, he says to himself with no one else around him. I need to gather the other recruits to defend against this goblin menace. Delana, a fellow recruit, has misplaced her bow, so we dispatched Jameis and Toblaine to secure the gate whilst I search for Delana's missing weapon. In a humorous twist, I find myself frantically clicking on beds, convinced the bow must be hidden somewhere around them. I spend an embarrassing amount of time on this wild goose chase before finally spotting the bow behind Delana's bed. At this point, I've embraced my fate as a blind moron. Finally, we assemble in front of Corporal Binns. It's the most awkward lineup you could imagine. I have no idea why we're stood like this, but we are joined by General Meow, who is, in my opinion, the unsung hero for this tale. A quick cutscene introduces us to combat. To initiate a fight, you click on the target, you then click attack, then you select your weapon. It's a few too many clicks for my taste, and while it's manageable now, I can already sense that repeated combat sessions might start feeling like a chore. Our first kill gives us around 40% of a level and opens the Professions tab. Unlike most MMOs, combat, here called Guard, is treated as a profession, just like gathering or crafting. It reminds me a little bit of RuneScape, but it feels odd. Still, clicking on a specific profession shows you where to find mobs to grind or gather items, assuming the area is already discovered. No need for early 2000s fan-made wikis here, which is definitely a perk. Our next encounter is with a character who looks like he stepped out of a 1970s disco. Hey guard, really? I just saved this guy, and he's calling me guard like I'm some medieval NPC. I am the main character here. As it turns out, he wants help moving a box. Sure, no biggie, though maybe we should focus on the goblins first. But I'd rather avoid an aggressive pimp in my life, so I comply. He pays decently, so no complaints here. Not long after, I land myself in a little bit of trouble. It seems Marcus, our disco pimp friend, wasn't as significant as I thought. During the commotion, Captain De Green has been injured, and I'm charged with creating a healing potion. I'll admit, I'm about as useful as a wooden spoon in a sword fight when it comes to potion making. Ebsworth, in a surprising display of wisdom, insists on administering it himself. Good call. And just like that, the captain is saved. Following on, we are rewarded with a new spell, Immunity, which stops mobs from targeting us. A welcome addition to the arsenal. At this point, we're tasked with learning how to use a bow and to reach level 60 to progress past episode 1. This war feels like the game's first significant hurdle, but nothing too overwhelming. Surprisingly, we get a privacy setting notification, which defaults to no interaction with others. A curious choice for an MMO. We toggle all of them back on and dive into the grind. After spending a little bit too long fighting sparring guards, I decide to channel my inner Gordon Ramsay and dive into Brighter Shore's cooking system. My first challenge, the humble bacon sandwich. It's a cool feature as it's not just a click and craft setup. You have to actually fry the bacon, then bring it to a preparation table to complete the recipe. I like this added touch. It's more engaging, and I can imagine later recipes will let us experiment with more kitchen gadgets. There's also a nearby ingredient bank, which is very welcome given the game's unstackable ingredients and small bag size. After a brief culinary detour, my bloodlust reignites, so I go after some aptly named death crows. But the area's swarming with other players, so I decide to explore further. Enter Pipe Alley. The devs really stretched their creative muscles here on this one. And eventually into a shop charmingly called the Cloak Room. Yes, they sell cloaks. There's a level 20 requirement for capes, but I'm curious if they'll have legendary status like RuneScape capes, or if they're just glorified fashion statements. A bit further on, we chat with Commander Hackett, who dangles a sword reward in exchange for some goblin killing. Unfortunately, the most conspicuous thief in history steals the key to his chest. We chase him all of 10 meters and recover it, breaking immersion just a tad. Hackett introduces us to gear tuning, which upgrades your gear based on the chapter you're playing. A handy but slightly restrictive feature, which I will realize later on. Sadly, I haven't unlocked the Hopeful Obelisk yet, so I set off on another exploration spree. After a decent amount of wandering, I finally find that obelisk, only to realize it's broken. The missing piece, called the spike, has conveniently washed downstream, so I grab it near some sandy pufferfish. Back at the obelisk, a cutscene with some serious Stargate SG-1 vibes unfolds, and we discover the spike doesn't quite fit. Meresina hands me a tablet with instructions, which looks simple enough. Place symbols in their correct holders. Doing so activates a Cryo Knight, who appears to be somewhat irritated at being summoned to answer our tech support question. We enlist Anjay again to unblock his magic, and the obelisk is restored. Honestly, this quest felt a bit bloated. I can't help but think it would fit better in the main storyline than as a side quest. But hey, XP is XP. At this point, I decide it's time to level up in earnest. I aim to bring all of my professions to about level 10, which involves a healthy mix of fishing, foraging, combat, potion making, and cooking. The cooking profession opens a neat feature at level 9, the bounty board. It's essentially a meal delivery service where NPCs request specific dishes for bonus XP and currency. Finally, I reach level 60 and return to bins, which wraps up episode 1. I received 16k guard XP, a modest payday, and access to Hope Forest. A promising start to episode 2 lies ahead, but soon after, the game hits me with a peculiar realization. All of the professions I trained in episode 1 don't carry over to episode 2. I essentially have to start fresh. I could obviously go back to episode 1 and use episode 1 professions, but I cannot use episode 1 professions in episode 2. For an MMO, this feels like an odd design choice, especially in a genre that usually emphasizes continuity. Sure, later on there'll be player trading and the promise of PvP, but right now, Brighter Shores is starting to feel more like a offline RPG. Despite this, I carry on and stumble into a questline involving a dryad and forest corruption. The forest aesthetic is a nice change, even if it does feel a little bit more claustrophobic than Hopeport. Eventually, I find a magic cave as part of the quest, and I'm presented with my first major choice. Do I become a Cryo Knight, a Hammer Mage, or a Guardian? Naturally, I pick Cryo Knight. It sounds cool, pun intended. But after the ceremony, absolutely nothing changes at this point, aside from the Dryad's evident disappointment. I stick with it a bit longer, but my enthusiasm is waning. While the first few hours of Brighter Shores felt promising, the segmented profession system and the MMO light feel ultimately undercut my drive. There's potential here, and maybe I'll revisit it after a full release. But for now, I'm concluding my time with Brighter Shores. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.